America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Alfredo Ortiz, CEO of Job Creators Network. Please subscribe to the Salem Podcast Network.com or wherever your podcasts are available. Today, we're joined by Secretary Alex Acosta. Alex served as the 27th United States Secretary of Labor from 2017 to 2019. Secretary Acosta has served in 3 presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed positions. In 2002, he was appointed to serve as a member of the National Labor Relations Board. In 2003, he was appointed Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. And from 2005 to 2009, he served as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. Mr. Secretary, welcome to Main Street Matters. We really do appreciate the time that you're going to spend with us today. And we're just so thankful also for all of the service that you've given to our country and for really fighting for the freedoms that we so desperately need in this country right now.
Well, thank you. And let me just say that you've been an advocate for small business for so many years.
Thank you.
And when I was Secretary of Labor, we worked together, and your contributions were invaluable. So thank you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, this conversation is really going to be pretty easygoing. Overall, what we're going to be talking about is just a little bit about you, who you are, and how did you get to this position? I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that are like, how do you do that? How do you become a Secretary of Labor or any secretary, a cabinet position? But kind of walk us through a little bit of your history. I know that you're, you're of your background, but let's talk about that with our viewers.
Well, I have been blessed to have so many amazing job opportunities, but it really starts back home in the family. My parents came over from Cuba. They met in high school. They married young. Okay. And my mom was in her teens when she had me.
Oh, wow.
Neither my parents went to college, but they always emphasized education.
Okay.
They worked so I could study, and education was her top priority, and it set me up for my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, education for me is also with my mom. We came from Mexico, and we were poor. My mom was a housekeeper, but she knew that education also was going to really be what pulls me out of that situation. So that's a wonderful here. So from that, how did you kind of progress to the next levels?
Well, I had great educational opportunities, and from that I started working initially in banking, and then I went back to law school and had the opportunity to clerk for Sam Alito, who was then a pretty recently appointed judge.
Okay.
Worked hard. Hard work is so important, and it's as a parent, I worry about that sometimes.
Right.
My mom worked a second job to pay for my school. At one point, she had to sell a car to help pay for my school. Now I have the opportunity to provide for my kids in a different way.
Right.
But how do we show our children the importance of hard work? Because, our parents were able to do it by example, and we also have to pass that work ethic along.
Right.
Because it's not just access to education, but it's what you do with it. How hard are you willing to work? And we'll talk more about the labor market.
Right.
But one of the big concerns that we have now is that more and more folks are not engaging with work.
Right. I know that's a big concern. I mean, something that people ask me about is the work ethic, the American work ethic. It really has over the past couple of years even really, really changed, I think, from what even 5 years ago, which is very disappointing. And I know you had the opportunity to attend Harvard as well. As you know, Harvard in the past couple of days with the turmoil in the Mideast has actually been in the news a lot. What do you think about what's going on at the higher education as we're talking about education overall? Because it seems like it's really kind of going in a direction that may not be as healthy as we'd like it to be in this country.
I don't think we should quibble. It's not that it may not be as healthy; it's that it's very unhealthy.
Uh,
I had the opportunity. I was contacted by some current Harvard students. They're conservatives, and they wanted to have coffee. And I said, why don't we do one better? Come over to our house. We'll cook you dinner. And so a bunch of conservative students came over to our house. They're working one of the school papers, and they're writing anonymously.
oh,
They're writing anonymously because they are afraid that if they identify themselves, that professors will grade them differently.
wow.
Right? Universities are supposed to be that place where you
Right.
can express your views, where you can experiment with different perspectives,
Right.
where if there's one place where there's freedom of speech, it should be a university.
Absolutely.
And conservatives are afraid to identify themselves because it's gotten so one-sided
Hmm.
and so wokeist
Right.
that they don't think they will get a fair shake by their professors.
Right.
What
Right.
kind of signal are we sending? This is the United States where you're supposed to be free to express ideas,
Right.
not a communist country.
Right. Right. And unfortunately, it seems like it's really happening across a lot of our higher education campuses. I mean, I have to tell you, I've been watching the news and the riots that are taking place and stuff like that. But I mean, it's interesting because there's a free speech piece
Right.
of it, but all of that does
But
really seem to
but
be
let me,
attacked.
if I can interrupt, it's
Yeah,
more
yeah.
than free speech
Yeah.
because universities are supposed to be where you have free debate, where you develop your ideas, where you develop, our future leaders.
Right.
I was a conservative on campus. Some of my best friends were liberals, and we'd go out and we'd have a beer and we'd
Yeah.
talk till whatever hour of the morning, and we'd sharpen our ideas, we'd change, we'd learn from each other.
Right. Right.
If we can no longer learn from each other on campus, it's more than free speech. We're hurting the education of our future leaders.
Right, right. Yeah, it was actually very concerning. I went to a small liberal arts college in California, and when the whole Black Lives Matter movement was happening, they actually issued a letter to the president saying that they have decided which side was the correct side, and that they would actually not allow conversation of the other side to take place on campus. And I have to tell you, I was mortified when I got that letter. I actually called the president of the college. And I told her, I said, I was very involved all 4 years here. I was in student government. I'm ashamed of this. It's
Ye-
amazing.
If you go back to where did the tenure system come from? The idea of faculty tenure is academic freedom, freedom to
Right.
write what you believe, freedom to speak what you believe, freedom to research what you believe without fear of retaliation in the job
Right.
or in the pocketbook, right?
Right.
And that was the whole idea of faculty tenure.
Yeah.
But now all that idea of academic freedom applies only if you have preferred views.
Right. Right.
And that goes contrary to the entire university system. I think it's interesting because I actually think university administrations are realizing what's happening
Mhm.
and trying to push back a little bit,
Right.
but they are so afraid of their faculty
Right.
that they aren't doing enough. They aren't
Right.
doing nearly enough.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I think we really need to figure out how to address. I don't even know how we would start addressing it because it's almost like the monster's been created. How do you put the genie back in the bottle? To your point, the faculty, they're all kind of in this area. I mean, and if, God forbid, you're a conservative faculty member somehow, it's like you're probably not going to last long on the
Right.
campus. I mean, it's really, really sad. But anyway, sorry to diverge.
No, but look, it's an
you
important, work and education are closely related. It's an important topic.
Yeah, yeah. So our labor force.
Yes.
I mean, give us a sense as to what's going on. You've seen obviously years of that. You saw pre-COVID, and then during COVID, and now post-COVID. So give us your kind of point of view of what's going on. In the labor
So I
force.
want to back up a little bit, and,
Okay.
and we have enough time to sort of take a big picture
Yeah,
look
yeah.
here. The media loves to talk about the unemployment rate. During the Trump years, the unemployment rate was at record lows, and it stayed, and since COVID, it's gone back to pretty low rates. Small businesses are saying we can't find enough people to hire.
Right.
But I want to take a step back because unemployment, I don't think, is the right measure.
Okay.
I think the right measure is labor force participation.
Okay.
And this is real simple. The unemployment rate says of those people who want to work, how many can't find a job? What's the percentage of the people who want to work who can't find a job?
Okay.
The labor force participation asks a different question. It says, what is the percentage of working age adults who want to work in the first place?
Right.
And around 2000, the percentage of working age adults that wanted to work was about 68, 69%. It varied a little bit, but closer to 70.
Okay.
And if you compare us to most of Europe, we're always in the top in the top few countries.
Okay.
A high percentage of Americans were engaged in the workforce.
Okay.
It started to drop around 2000. With the Obama years, it dropped rapidly. And by 2016, it was down to about 62 to 63%.
Oh, that's a huge drop then.
It's a huge drop. It's about 7 to 8 percentage point drop, right? That is like the economy contracting 7 to 8 percentage points, right?
Right.
Because our economy is simple. The number of people working times what they make.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And if the percentage of people working drops so much, that's like a huge recession.
Now, some people will probably say, oh, yeah, but productivity and technology has created that situation. But how is kind of that balance between the population aspect of the labor force participation rate and this technology boom?
So you could say that productivity has created that, but the bottom line is the drop in the United States was much greater than the drop in the rest of Europe.
Okay.
Or the drop in Europe itself.
Okay.
And so there are other things that are going on here. And you know, from a big picture perspective, a country where 70% of the population works and pays taxes and 30% doesn't looks very different than a country where 60% works and 40% doesn't. Right. And so it went down to about 63. During the Trump years, we tried to increase it. If we're being honest, the downward stopped. It ticked up a little bit. Then COVID hit, and it dropped to 60. It's come back to about 62. But here's the really frightening part. We're back on that downward trend. The trend that was stopped during the Trump years has started again.
Okay.
And the Labor Department under President Biden has projected that by 2030, the labor force participation rate will be as low as it was in the worst month of COVID.
Wow.
Right?
But that's horrible for the entire economy then.
It's horrible for the economy. It's horrible for business because they won't find workers. And it's not that the workers aren't here. It's that the workers aren't looking for work. Right? Because if we had the same percentage of workers looking for work as we had in 2000, we'd have 10 million plus more workers out there. Right? But it's people that aren't looking for work, people that might be receiving government benefits as a result, people that aren't paying taxes. So this is a twofer. They're not paying taxes, and then they're getting government benefits. And that is not sustainable in the long run.
Right. I was going to ask about the kind of the benefits part of that. I mean, how much of it is really just an encouragement with, we've gone beyond just social net safety or, like nets that are helping people in bad times to really just kind of people are just dependent now on living that way. And it's okay not to work. I mean, it kind of goes back to the question of the work ethic piece. I can't tell you how many people I've heard that are literally saying, why would I want to work? Because the government pays me not to work.
Well, and that's the problem. We were talking about earlier, and it's something that's really interesting to look at is what's happened to the summer job. Right. Are we telling our kids go out there and work over the summer or not? Right. And Microsoft did a really interesting study, and the result of which was they funded the study that early job engagement is one of the biggest signs of later job success. Right. Teaching kids to work hard early is one of the biggest indicators of what will happen in the future. Right. And that decline of the summer job, that decline of the college job, that decline of the job if you're not going to college early on, is really indicative of what's happening. Because if you look at the percentage of adults, you talked about productivity and technology. Among the older age brackets, we haven't seen the same kind of decline. Where we've seen the decline is among the younger age brackets. Where a smaller percentage are looking to work.
But that's really concerning. Now we're talking about Social Security. I mean, because as you know, Social Security is funded by the youth of today, basically the young workers. So if we have less young workers, I mean, we're going to have a bankrupt system really quickly here.
That's right. And it's not less young workers, it's less young workers looking to work,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And part of it is
Right.
the benefits, right?
Mhm.
We've gone, as you said, from a social safety net for if there's an emergency, let's make sure that you're okay, to, and it happened a lot during COVID, let's make sure that you're comfortable. And
Right.
if you're comfortable without working, then the incentive to go work is a little different, right?
Right.
And so I really think we need to look at that safety net and ask, is it really a safety net, or are we doing safety net plus?
Right. Because it literally seems like we're encouraging people to stay at home. Interestingly enough, just this morning, actually, I want to pull this article. It was in the opinion editorial of the Wall Street Journal. Let me pull it up really quickly here. It just closed on me. And it read, let's see, a labor right to work from home. The NLRB sues X for firing an employee who refused to come to work. I mean, that's pretty nuts.
Well, one of the impacts of COVID, I think it's accelerated this work from home trend.
Right.
And I think there are a number of dangerous parts of this. One of my concerns is that we're creating two tiers of workers.
Right.
Those who have the ability to work from home and those who don't.
Right.
Right. And I'm a big believer that it's important that we have unifying factors
Right.
where we all share some experiences. And more, we can order groceries delivered to our house. We can work from home. We can do all these things where we might not see people that aren't like us as much.
Right. Sure.
And that's not good for society.
Right.
But as more and more people work from home, particularly professionals,
Yeah.
I think there's this sense of lack of fairness that's
Right.
happening.
Right.
And so what you're starting to see, Pennsylvania recently introduced a 4-day-a-week work week law,
Okay.
where instead of working 5 days a week, the standard work week could be 4 days a week.
Right.
So folks could be at home one extra day.
And I think that's what the auto unions are trying to do as well.
And
correct?
that's the auto unions are not just looking for a 40% wage increase, but a 40% wage increase and only work 32 hours but get paid for 40 hours of work, right? Which is a separate issue in and of itself.
Yeah.
But I think one of the trends that we're seeing is 5 days a week too much. And on the one hand, we can sort of laugh at that and say, well, we should be working 5 days a week.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think we need to be sensitive to the reality that there's some people that get to work from home all the time.
Right.
And some people, service workers, restaurant workers are a great example. You can't work from home if you're working a restaurant.
Right.
And we need to start talking about ways to address that, because if we don't, we're going to see things like that NLRB case. We're
Right.
going to see things like the 4-day-a-week work law. And that's going to just hit the labor force participation rate further.
Right. So the NLRB, now that we're talking
Right.
about the National Labor Relations
Yep.
Board, talk to us first of all, what is the NLRB? And then I got a couple of follow-up questions.
So
after
sure,
that.
I served as a member of the NLRB. The NLRB is, in essence, think of it as a labor court.
Okay.
It is charged with administering the National Labor Relations Act, in essence, union relations, what is and is not allowed in union elections and
Okay.
union bargaining. When there are violations, the NLRB's general counsel prosecutes the violation, and then it goes up to the board, and the board decides it, almost sitting like a labor court.
Okay. And so when did it start, first of all?
It started, it was one of these New Deal
Okay. Okay,
agencies that's been around for decades and
Do
decades.
you think there's a need for the NLRB?
So there's certainly a need to have an agency that overlooks and processes labor violations. One of the issues that comes up is, should the NLRB be organized and structured the way it is? Because right now, it moves very, very slowly. It was
Right,
one of
right.
the original New Deal agencies, and it hasn't really been restructured, in decades.
Right.
And is there room to improve it? Is there room to streamline it? Is there room to save and make it much better? Absolutely.
Right.
The problem is that neither side wants to reopen this because it's so full of strife and contention
Yeah.
that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats want to reopen the structure of the board.
Okay. So early on in my tenure with Job Creators
Right.
Network, we took on the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. because we felt, well, first of all, they're unelected bureaucrats. I mean, we didn't elect these folks, and the level of influence and power now they're having over our workforce and the rules in the workforce seem to be greater and greater, especially I think under this administration. And recently, there's a lot of conversation of what they want to do: independent contractor rule, overtime rule. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of that, because there is a lot of conversation now in terms of the direction the Biden administration wants to take the NLRB.
Right. Well, the independent contractor rule and the overtime rule, are you talking about NLRB or Department of Labor? Because traditionally those come out of the Department of Labor more than the
Okay.
NLRB.
Okay. Well, my understanding was it was NLRB, but please correct us. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's Department
I
of
mean,
Labor.
it depends, but
Right.
the NLRB would have jurisdiction over union arrangements
Okay,
primarily.
okay.
Overtime is traditionally the
Okay.
wage. It's traditionally the wage and hour division of the Department of
Okay.
Labor.
All right.
Um,
So then talk to us about
right.
then the department. Let's take a step back
Right.
and put it in the right bucket. Department of Labor then. It seems to be very, very kind of in your face in terms of what they're doing and really managing that workforce well beyond, I think, what's needed from my perspective. But tell us for your perspective and what's going on
So
there.
so this goes to, what's the administrative state?
Right.
And there was a time when Congress made all our laws, right? And then starting with the New Deal, we started creating what we call the administrative state
Right.
and sort of agency rulemaking.
Okay.
And, the cynic in me says that Congress is almost okay with this because then they don't have to make the hard decisions.
Right.
So they're more than happy to delegate it to the Department of Labor, for example, to write an independent contractor rule or an overtime rule.
Okay.
But to some extent, that responsibility really belongs with Congress.
Right.
But more and more, it's been delegated to the agencies.
Okay.
One of the problems is that the Department of Labor statutes are really broadly written.
Okay.
And so, for example, during the Obama years, the Department of Labor under Obama used one of the statutes, ERISA, to write what they call a fiduciary rule that really regulated the securities industry. Right? How's labor regulating the securities industry?
Right.
Well, because labor is charged with ensuring employee retirement accounts are adequately managed.
Right.
And it said, well, if we can do that, then we've got authority to regulate the securities industry that's managing those accounts.
Right. Right.
During COVID, it was the Department of Labor that I was asked to write the vaccine mandate through OSHA,
Okay.
the Workplace Safety
Right,
Agency,
right.
not HHS.
Right.
And so labor's statutes are so broadly written that particularly liberal administrations say we can do almost anything.
Right.
And what's happened again is courts have, time and again, with the fiduciary rule that I mentioned,
Right.
regulating securities, with the COVID vaccine, courts have said labor is going too far. Labor is exceeding its mandate.
Right.
But and with independent contractor, you see some of the same thing. Is the job of the Labor Department to ensure that wage and hour laws are followed,
Okay.
or to rewrite wage and hour laws through the rulemaking process because
Right.
it doesn't think that the Congress's wage and hour laws are sufficient?
Right. Now, another term that I hear in there is joint employer,
Right.
kind of alongside with the independent contractor. Can you talk to us about joint employer? Does it come out of Department of Labor, or is it another group under DOL? And how does it impact, let's say, because obviously our podcast is about small businesses,
Right.
so you're like, why does that matter, right? Why does joint employer matter? Can you talk to us about that?
And
as
joint
well?
employer is one of these where it can come from many places, but let's talk about the Department of Labor's joint employer
Okay.
first. The idea of a joint employer is if you have, for example, a franchise. If the franchise, one individual franchise is not as deep a pocket as one McDonald's doesn't have the same pocketbook as McDonald's Corporation writ large, right?
Right.
And so the idea is if the franchise is a joint employer with McDonald's Corp.,
Okay.
then if you sue the individual McDonald's franchise, you can also sue McDonald's Corp. And put them on the hook.
Because right now they're independently owned, basically.
Because
right
right now they're independently owned.
Okay.
And the question is there such a close relationship that they're jointly employing the person so that
Okay.
the corporate entity is responsible for the acts of the franchise.
Okay.
And ultimately, that kind of undermines the whole franchise system.
I was going to ask you, I mean, it completely undermines the whole franchise system, which really, quite frankly, a lot of immigrants use to break into the American dream. They buy a franchise, then they buy two, and then they buy three.
Right.
I mean, I think you remember meeting a friend of mine, John Mata, who heads up the Coalition of Franchisee Associations. I think he owns like 30 Dunkin' Donuts now.
Right.
He started with one. I mean, he's a Greek immigrant. This is the way the American dream has been formed through the whole franchise model.
It is, and what this administration is trying to do systematically is use different rules at the Department of Labor and elsewhere
Right.
to regulate in a way that Congress would never pass. I want to take a step back because I think we're getting caught up in a lot of detail, and I want to sort of do a big picture. You know, from my perspective, we're a democracy, and in a democracy, Congress makes the laws.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
What happens is, particularly in liberal administrations, there are certain things that they want that they can't get done.
Right.
Right. And so in the
the student loan.
like the student loans thing, right?
The
student loans is a great example. And so rather than talk Congress into passing, the student loan waiver,
right,
the student loan forgiveness, they went to the Department of Education and said, write a rule.
Right.
And so what you're seeing here is these are things that aren't popular, that the people don't want, that can't make it through Congress.
Right.
So we're going to backdoor them by using agency rulemaking to write a rule and backdoor the outcome that we want, even though we know that the democratic institutions can't get them done.
Right.
And whether it's the joint employer, whether it's independent contractor, whether it's student loans, we shouldn't be using backdoor rulemaking to change policy just because Congress can't pass it.
Right.
If Congress can't pass it, maybe it's because people don't want it.
Right. Well, and it's interesting. So, this administration, at least from my perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is probably the worst so far we've seen in terms of this kind of rulemaking, backdoor rulemaking. As you know, we sued the Department of Education over the college loans. But that was clearly a violation and clearly something that had to be in Congress. Yet, we know that Congress voted on it. They said, no, you can't do it. And we know the Supreme Court ruled in our favor as well and said, hey, Joe, you can't do it. But he's still doing it.
Right. And this is the point I was trying to make. And as an aside, you all did great work in this case.
Thank you.
You brought the lawsuit. The court agreed and stayed it. And if you had not done that and the court hadn't stayed it and those payments had gone out, I don't think the Supreme Court could have reversed all that. Right. Because once those payments issue, it's done.
There's no clawback.
Right. There's no clawback.
Yeah.
So you're all responsible for saving the federal government billions and billions.
Thank you.
But
I'll just take 1%.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't work that way, but if only. But look, I think this goes to a fundamental issue, which is, do we respect the institutions of democracy?
Right.
Do we really, or do we just want the results that we want?
Right.
And the student loans are a great example. Congress voted on it. It couldn't get through Congress. So they said, we're just going to do this.
Right.
There is no way when Congress passed the law that allowed the secretary to restructure loans.
I mean,
it envisioned forgiveness of basically all the student loan debt. Right. How many billions was it? Was it
425
billion? 425 billion. Okay, that statute did not envision a $425 billion forgiveness.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
there is no way. And the Supreme Court came back and said that. Just like there's no way that the workplace safety statute envisioned mandating a vaccine for every worker.
Which we also sued for.
Which you also sued for, which was an experimental vaccine at the time, right?
And by the way, it was really going to hurt our small businesses. Which why I took great exception to the way the president talked about it, is only impacting our largest employers in our country when it was going down to 100 employees.
Right, and this is not about whether it was the right outcome or the wrong outcome.
Yeah.
It's about Congress should be passing the vaccine mandate. Congress should be passing a student loan forgiveness or not.
Right.
right? But let's leave it to the democratic institutions. But
Right.
right now, what we're doing is we're saying, well, if Congress can't do it, we'll just get an agency that's not elected to write it.
Right. It's back to the unelected bureaucrat
To
issue.
the unelected bureaucrat. And then when it gets struck down, what was really troubling was the administration said, if the court strikes it down, we're going to try doing it a different way.
Right.
So now what they've said is after a certain number of years, student loans are forgiven after a certain number of years of payment. So now they have said that a payment, they're writing a rule that says that a payment includes any payment, even if the payment was $0,
Right.
right?
Which
So
I still don't understand.
any
how that
month,
works.
any month where you don't pay, you're still paying.
Right.
And therefore, we're going to forgive billions and millions,
Right.
billions and billions with the B based on
Yeah.
that. And you cannot with a straight face say that's what the statute intended.
Right. Right.
And my concern is this, putting aside whether it's good or bad policy, we have to get out of the habit of using the administrative state
Right. Right.
that is unelected bureaucrats
Right.
to do whatever the administration wants when it's clear that's not what the democratic institutions wanted.
Right. But how do you stop it? Let's say on the college loan thing, for example, because he's doing workarounds right now.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's another, I think 125 billion has already gone out, like been forgiven, even though all the, Supreme Court said no, Congress said no. How do we stop it? I mean, it almost seems like we're in a constitutional crisis. How
Well,
do you stop a president that basically says, I don't care what you guys tell me?
Well, I think fundamentally we need to really look at the Administrative Procedures Act and the reach of the administrative state
Yeah.
and pull that back, right?
Yeah.
And the court has started doing that. The court started ruling on what they call major, on what the court has said. I don't want to go into technicalities. So what the court has said is on really major issues, Congress needs to speak clearly, or
Right.
we're not going to let the administrative state,
Right.
pass in essence a new law.
Right.
And so it started building that body of jurisprudence. And this term, the court's going to reconsider
Right.
some fundamental parts of the administrative state. But we really need to pull back that administrative state. And let me just say, it's hard to do that because, when Republicans are in power, they're like, well, now we have the power.
Right.
So, maybe we shouldn't pull it back now. But I think conservatives need to stand up for principle. And even when they're in power,
Yeah.
say we shouldn't use the administrative state this way. And we need to pull back the administrative state, particularly when we're in power,
Right.
because pulling that back will behoove us in the long
Right.
term.
Right. One of the things I did want to talk to you about too is something that you and I worked on when you were secretary. It's called association health plans. As you know, insurance costs, even though right now it's about inflation, right? And that's the biggest concern. Insurance costs is still one of the biggest pieces hitting our small business owners. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I think I just saw something that said premiums are going to go up another 20% next year for our small
Right.
businesses. So you had a great idea, association healthcare plans, right? Or association health plans. First of all, talk to us a little bit about what that idea was. And then what happened? Why did it stop?
Right. So, AHPs or association health plans or healthcare. Let me back up a second because we talked about the workforce earlier.
Yeah.
And I do think one reason we talked to that maybe we need to reconsider the social safety net and whether it's social safety net or safety
Yeah.
net plus, but we also need to think about wages.
Right.
And as believers in the free market, are we allowing wages to rise, or are we artificially hurting wages?
Right. Right.
And one thing that does impact wages is healthcare,
Okay.
because hiring a person is incredibly expensive, and it's not just their salary, but it's their benefits.
The benefits, right.
Right. And, if you hire someone for $10, $12, $15 an hour, let's say you hire someone for $15 an hour, you might end up paying an extra $10 an hour in benefits.
Wow.
And that is just
Which nobody talks about.
which nobody talks
Right,
about. So
right.
the real wage is $25.
Right.
And I bet you if they got to take those $25 home, they'd feel very different about working
Right.
than if they only take $15 home,
Right,
right?
right,
Because
right.
the employer behind the scenes is probably paying about $10 more
Okay.
per hour per person in benefits for a full-time worker,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that's just a lot of money. And large part of that, the largest is healthcare.
Okay.
So the healthcare world is divided into two markets.
Okay.
What we'll call the large group market and the small group market.
Okay.
And businesses under 50 are in the small group market.
Okay. So most of
So
our viewers,
most of your viewers, most of small businesses
right.
are in the small group market. And when Obamacare or the ACA was passed, the rules for large businesses were made much more liberal and flexible than for small businesses.
Okay.
So small businesses have more stringent rules and requirements placed on them.
Right.
That means that small businesses on average pay about 30% more for the same healthcare benefits as a large business.
Right.
Which is backwards. If anything,
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna
you
say
want to
it's-
help the small business,
Right.
but in the push-pull that is Washington, large corporations had lots of lobbyists, and small business has a few representatives, but
Right.
but they sort of lost out on this.
I mean, outside of us, I mean,
Right,
America's,
yeah.
small business megaphone.
Well, you weren't around,
It's
right?
like, yeah.
You weren't around when Obamacare passed,
Right,
and
right.
and so that really hurts small businesses because they're paying 30% more in healthcare on average.
Right.
And so the vision here was, and most small business owners don't go into small business so they can purchase healthcare, so they can negotiate healthcare.
They don't actually want to be in healthcare. I mean,
Right.
really dealing with it, right?
That's not their specialty,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they have so few employees. It's not like they have an HR specialist
Right.
that's doing this full time,
Right.
right? And so the vision was every community has a chamber of commerce, and every community has a restaurant association and a realtors association.
Yeah.
And ERISA says that an association of employers.
And what's ERISA?
ERISA is the law that governs workplace benefits
Okay.
like healthcare.
Okay.
And retirement. And it says that an association of employers can act as an employer for benefit purposes.
Okay.
And so the vision was, why not have the Chamber of Commerce or the association of the local association of restaurants or the local association of realtors act as an employer and provide health care for all its members' employees. So if you're a small business, you can join the chamber, and instead of you're providing health care directly,
Right.
your employees could then get health care through the Chamber of Commerce.
Which is nice because then you kind of push it to.
because you push it, and
Third-party,
the Chamber of Commerce can then scale up.
Right.
And if the Chamber of Commerce has 100 small businesses with 10 employees each, well,
Right.
now it has 1,000.
Right. So
you
now
know.
it almost is a large group.
So
right?
now it's a large group,
Right.
and now it can get all the benefits of being a large
Okay.
employer. And it's also going to be better at negotiating the healthcare because it's not
Right.
negotiating for 10, it's negotiating for 1,000.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
Right. It can really specialize, it
Right.
can offer multiple options. And one of the things that I liked is, I find that sometimes folks are scared to leave their job
100%.
because they don't want to lose their healthcare.
Right. Yeah, it's not portable.
Right, and I think that's really, I believe in the market, and to have a good market for wages,
Right.
people need to be free to say, if you don't pay me more, I'm going to leave and go here, right?
Right.
But because healthcare isn't portable, that's harder. But if
Right,
everyone's
right.
getting it through associations, if this restaurant is part of the chamber and this other restaurant's part of the chamber, then it's the same insurance, and you can carry it from small business to small business.
Now, sounds like it makes common sense. Great idea. Yet you were stopped.
Yes, so we were stopped. So we started it. Wildly popular. A number of chambers of commerce started it. Hundreds of thousands of individuals joined.
So success. Yay,
Success, right?
Time to party.
But a handful of states objected and brought a suit. And they very carefully picked their court. And the court stopped it. And the court stopped it in essence because they said, this rule is written for large groups. These are small businesses. It's not fair to give them access to the large group. The law doesn't let you do that. My perspective is
Wow.
if they all come together and they look like a large group and they act like a large group, then why can't they be a large
Right,
group, right?
right.
But it was stopped by a judge, and the administration, the Biden administration, dropped the appeal.
Right.
And so it was never really tested in the courts of appeal.
Right.
But I think this is a really important solution for a future administration.
Yeah.
Look, if we could reduce the healthcare costs for small businesses by 30%, same healthcare,
Right.
same protections.
Right.
All I'm saying is that, a small business should be able to operate. Your local association of, restaurants should be able to offer the same insurance
Right.
as a large national chain
Right.
and play by the same rules as a large national chain, right?
Right.
I'm not saying that it should be any worse or different.
Right.
I'm just saying what the big corporations, what IBM and
Just trying
GM
to
can
give a level
do.
playing field.
Yeah, let's let the Chamber of Commerce do too. Let's
Right.
level the playing field and not keep hurting small
Right.
business.
I mean, I think that's, Mr. Secretary, what's so frustrating, I think, for the American public is it makes total common sense. I mean, what you're talking about and what you described, yet you had it blocked.
Right.
Right.
Well,
So-
and let me make the situation worse. The politics behind this and the reason it got blocked is because there were people that if we make insurance cheaper, because people told me this, they said, look, the problem with this is you're making insurance cheaper and more
Right.
affordable.
Right.
And as a result, people are going to leave the exchange, the Obamacare exchange.
Okay.
And that's going to weaken the exchange. And so we don't want things that are going to offer cheaper, better alternatives because ultimately we think, we being the liberals, we're
Right.
saying we think people should be in the Obamacare exchange. So we don't want to make it easier.
Right. So so even though it made more sense, made it easier, made it less expensive for the small business owner, they canned it.
They canned it.
So,
They canned it because it made it easier because
Right.
it provides a better alternative to Obamacare.
So assuming for a second
Right.
that 2025,
Right.
we take over the House and the Senate and keep, the White House, keep the House and take the Senate.
Yeah.
Association health plans. Would you bring that back?
I
Make it
think
number one?
you bring that back.
Okay.
We can talk about comprehensive healthcare reform here or there or whatnot, but I think there's some parts that are easy. This is an easy one because we're not changing the offerings. We're not changing the
Right.
insurance.
Right.
All this says is that if you have associations of small businesses
Right.
that together have as many employees as a large business, they can follow the large business rules.
Right. Right.
That's all we're saying. We're not changing the underlying rules. We're just saying that 10 restaurants, if they band together, can operate like a large restaurant for insurance
Right.
purposes.
Now, just out of curiosity, just because my head's kind of going like, I'm assuming we're going to win, so I want to make sure
Yeah.
that this is something we do in 25. Is this something that would go to Congress to make a law? Or
Going back to what I said, I think the cleanest way is to have Congress pass
Congress?
it
Okay.
and to have Congress pass a very clean, focused bill on this.
Okay.
Um,
So we can count on your help? to get it done?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good. Anything that you kind of want to talk about while you're Secretary of Labor or anything else that's on your mind and that's bothering you? I mean, we can cover anything. I mean, that's the
so
beauty.
we don't really have enough time. So let me just throw out a teaser because I think
Okay.
this is so important, which
Okay.
is ESG.
Okay.
Right. ESG is basically where more and more people are using voting rights and stocks
Okay.
to really engage in corporate governance.
Right.
And here's my concern. Going back to the big picture, we're a democracy and Congress should pass the laws. You're seeing more and more corporations engaging in politicking.
Right.
Right. And that worries me because if corporations, for example, start saying, we are not going to bank, if banks say, we're not going to bank disfavored industries, we're not going to bank oil, we're not going to bank gun manufacturers.
Right. Right.
Right. That's no longer our elected officials banning certain industries. It's now the corporate world
Sure.
banning certain industries.
Sure.
And it's easy to say, well, it's their right. But ultimately, if you can't get a bank account, you can't function.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if the bigger banks ban particular industries,
Right.
if the bigger banks say we're not going to hire people that have certain views,
Right.
that's a problem.
Or these social scores that
Or these
supposedly
social
are happening,
scores,
yeah.
right? And so ESG is a completely different topic, but I think we really need to think hard about the role of business and corporations
Right.
in what I call lawmaking, because more and more the rules that govern us as a society are not being written by our elected officials, not even by the
Right.
bureaucrats
Right.
of government, but by corporate boards that are just being driven by fear of wokeism.
Right. Right. So as we talk about ESG really quickly, because I would say most of our listeners would think like, well, that's something like When we hear like BlackRock and these large companies, how does this
But
impact
so
them?
let me give you an example.
Yeah.
There is a nonprofit, a Dutch nonprofit that is
Okay.
buying shares of oil companies,
Okay.
and its motto is this: countries can break treaties, countries can withdraw from treaties, but
Hmm.
shareholder-driven initiatives are binding.
Okay.
And they're doing this to force oil companies to go green, right?
Okay.
And so they literally will introduce shareholder resolutions to force oil companies to enact certain environmental rules,
Right.
right? And their view is, it doesn't matter whether Congress passed the law. We're just going to force it through the vote.
Right.
But here's the pernicious part of this. Shareholder democracy is not American democracy. In American democracy, it's one person, one vote. In shareholder democracy, it's $1, one vote. And that's okay if it's about the corporation, but that's not
Right.
okay
Right.
when it comes to writing the rules that bind us as a society,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so if all 5 oil companies, through shareholder initiatives, start following certain environmental mandates, then what's Congress doing, right?
Right.
Congress isn't relevant.
Right. I mean, this is why we're excited that we're having an opportunity to talk about this, because I would tell you that 99% of our small business owners probably don't think about
Well,
this on a day in, day out basis.
Here's where it affects them, because
Mhm.
one of the things that is being forced through shareholder initiative is an obligation for companies to roll up suppliers' ESG
Oh,
rules.
okay.
And so right now, shareholder initiatives only reach the public companies.
Okay.
But what I'm seeing more and more is a mandate
Okay.
that public company, through its
So they have
supply
to go all the way
contracts,
down.
then impose those initiatives
Right.
on its suppliers.
Right.
And that's going to start impacting small business, because
Right.
then those supply contracts will force the small businesses to incorporate the ESG mandates that are being forced on the large companies by these shareholder initiatives.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think this is something that I think we will keep an eye on,
Right.
and hopefully we'll have you back to talk about
It's a whole
ESG for
separate
little bit.
conversation.
Because it does sound extremely important. So, but like I said, I want to be respectful of your time, and as you can tell, I'm losing my voice a little bit. But Mr. Secretary, thank
This
you
was
so
really
much
fun. Thank
for
you
taking
for
the
having
time, and thank you all for listening. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. So please subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast. And we'll be back soon with another episode. And goodbye for now.